It started as an ordinary afternoon, just like any other. I was sitting on my porch, sipping a cold drink, enjoying the peaceful hum of the neighborhood. Birds chirped, a distant lawnmower buzzed, and the sun cast a warm golden glow over the houses. Everything felt calm, predictable, until I saw my neighbor, Mr. Dawson, walking toward me with a serious look on his face. Now, let me tell you, Mr. Dawson wasn't the type to ask for favors. He was the kind of man who handled things on his own, always polite but distant, someone you'd wave to in passing but never really have a deep conversation with. So when he stopped at my fence, cleared his throat and said, "I need your help with something important," I knew this wasn't just any favor. At first, I thought maybe he needed help with a repair or moving some furniture. But as he hesitated, rubbing his hands together, I could tell it was something much bigger. "It's complicated," he finally said, glancing around as if making sure no one else was listening. My curiosity was piqued. What could possibly be so serious that a man like him had to ask for help? I nodded and gestured for him to continue. He took a deep breath and said, "There's someone I need you to meet. And I need you to trust me when I say this might change everything." That's when I felt a strange mix of excitement and unease. What was he talking about? Who was this person? And how exactly was this supposed to change anything? I wanted to ask 100 questions, but something about his expression told me this wasn't the time for that. Without much explanation, he asked me to follow him. I hesitated for a second. Was this a mistake? But my gut told me to go, and before I knew it, I was walking beside him down the street, heart pounding with anticipation. We passed familiar houses, front yards I had seen 1,000 times, but somehow everything felt different. It was as if the air itself had shifted, thick with an unspoken tension. We finally stopped in front of a house at the very end of the block, one I had barely paid attention to before. It looked empty, the curtains drawn, the front porch slightly worn. Mr. Dawson turned to me and said in a low voice, "What happens next? You can't tell anyone." "Not yet." His words sent a shiver down my spine. He knocked twice, a quiet but deliberate sound. Seconds later, the door creaked open just enough for someone to peek through. I couldn't see much, just a pair of cautious eyes staring back at us. Then, slowly, the door opened wider, revealing a person who would change my life forever. And that's when I realized this was no ordinary favor. The door opened just enough for me to step inside, and as soon as I did, I felt the air shift. It wasn't just the dim lighting or the faint scent of old books and coffee. It was something else, something unspoken. The person standing in front of me was a woman, maybe in her late 20s, with tired eyes that held a mixture of fear and relief. She looked like she had been waiting for this moment, though I had no idea what this moment even was. Mr. Dawson stepped in behind me, closing the door softly. "This is Emily," he said, his voice lower now. "Emily, this is the person I was telling you about." She nodded slightly but didn't say a word. Instead, she studied me, as if trying to decide whether she could trust me. I glanced at Mr. Dawson, hoping for some kind of explanation, but he only sighed and motioned for me to sit. The living room was small and cluttered, but not in a messy way. More like someone had packed up their entire life in a hurry and then never fully unpacked. There were half-empty cups of tea on the coffee table, a worn-out backpack near the door, and a pile of folded blankets on the couch. It felt temporary, like she was ready to leave at any moment. Finally, Emily spoke. Her voice was quiet, careful. "I know this doesn't make sense yet," she said, "but I need help, and Mr. Dawson said you might be the only person I can trust." That caught me off guard. I wasn't sure what Mr. Dawson had told her, but I wasn't exactly a hero. I was just an ordinary neighbor, someone who went about their day without much drama. So why me? Why was I suddenly involved in whatever this was? I swallowed, trying to keep my voice steady. What kind of help? I asked. Emily exchanged a look with Mr. Dawson, who gave her a small nod. She took a deep breath before answering. I've been hiding, she admitted. And if the wrong person finds me, I don't know what will happen. My stomach tightened. Hiding? From who? And why? My mind raced with possibilities, each one more unsettling than the last. I wanted to ask more, to demand answers, but something about the way she said it, the quiet urgency in her voice, made me hesitate. Mr. Dawson leaned forward. I know this is a lot to take in, he said, but you need to understand. This isn't just about Emily. This is bigger than any of us. I felt my pulse quicken. Bigger than us? What had I just stepped into? I could feel my hands gripping the edge of the couch, my mind trying to process what I had just heard. Emily was hiding, someone was after her, and somehow I was being pulled into this without even knowing why. My instinct told me to ask more questions, to demand answers, but the way she and Mr. Dawson sat there, waiting, made it clear that whatever this was, it wasn't simple. Emily glanced toward the window, as if expecting someone to be watching. I wasn't supposed to be here this long, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I was planning to leave days ago, but something changed. Mr. Dawson cleared his throat. She saw something, he said, something she wasn't supposed to. That sent a chill through me. I looked between them, searching for clues, but neither of them seemed willing to say more just yet. Instead, Emily pulled her sleeves down over her wrists, staring at the floor. I don't even know who I can trust anymore, she admitted. Every time I think I'm safe, something happens. A message left where it shouldn't be. A car parked too long across the street. Footsteps outside my door in the middle of the night. My stomach knotted. This wasn't just paranoia. Someone was watching her, tracking her. And now, by standing in this house, by listening to her story, I had unknowingly stepped into the same danger. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. What did you see? I finally asked. Emily hesitated, her fingers tightening around the fabric of her sweater. Something that could ruin everything, she said. And if they find me, they'll do whatever it takes to keep me quiet. The room felt heavier, as if the walls themselves were closing in. My pulse pounded in my ears, but I forced myself to stay calm. Emily's eyes darted toward the window again, her body tense, like a person expecting something bad to happen at any moment. I need to know, I said, my voice steady but firm. What exactly did you see? She swallowed hard, then looked at Mr. Dawson. He gave her a small nod, as if encouraging her to speak, but even then she hesitated. It was like saying it out loud would make it even more real. There was a meeting, she finally said, late at night. I wasn't supposed to be anywhere near it, but I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. She glanced down at her hands as if replaying the moment in her mind. I heard them talking about something, plans, names, dates. At first I didn't understand, but then I saw one of their faces. A shiver ran down my spine. The way she said it sent a clear message. Whoever she saw, it was someone powerful, someone dangerous. The doorknob rattled. Someone was here. The room felt suffocating in the silence. My heartbeat pounded in my ears as I watched the shadow shift across the window. Whoever was outside wasn't just passing by. They were here for a reason. Emily's breathing was shallow, her hands gripping the edge of the couch so tightly her knuckles turned white. Mr. Dawson held up a hand, signaling us to stay still. The doorknob rattled again, harder this time. Then came 3 knocks, slow, deliberate. Whoever it was wasn't in a hurry. They wanted us to know they were there. I felt an urge to move, to do something, but I was frozen, my body torn between fear and the need to act. Mr. Dawson silently reached into the side table drawer and pulled out a small flashlight. No weapon, no phone, just a flashlight. What was he planning to do with that? Then, just as suddenly as it started, the knocking stopped. The footsteps retreated. A long, tense minute passed before Mr. Dawson finally exhaled. "They're gone," he whispered. Emily shook her head. "No," she said. "They're never just gone." Mr. Dawson sighed and ran a hand through his graying hair. "She didn't just overhear something small," he said. "She stumbled onto something that could bring down people who don't want to be exposed." Emily exhaled shakily. "And they know I heard them." A sudden noise outside made all three of us freeze. A car door slamming. The sound of footsteps approaching the house. Emily's breath hitched, and I felt my own chest tighten. "Is that them?" I whispered. Mr. Dawson didn't answer. Instead, he moved quickly to turn off the lights. "Stay quiet," he murmured. "Don't move." I didn't understand what she meant until I heard it. A small beep, faint but distinct. Then another. It was coming from outside. Mr. Dawson's face darkened as he moved to the window, peering out just enough to see without exposing himself. Then he swore under his breath. "What?" I whispered, but I already knew it wasn't good. He turned back, his face set with urgency. "They left something," he said. "In your mailbox." I swallowed hard. "What do you mean, my mailbox?" "I mean," he said, "this just became your problem too." Emily was already moving, grabbing a small bag she had packed earlier. "We can't stay here," she said. "They want us to know they were here. That means we have no time." I could barely keep up. A few hours ago, I had been sitting on my porch, thinking it was just another ordinary day. Now I was caught in something I didn't understand, with people who knew more than they were telling me. Before I could ask what was in the mailbox, the front porch light flickered. Then the power cut out completely. The house was plunged into darkness. The darkness was absolute. My breath caught in my throat as I heard Emily whisper, "They cut the power." Mr. Dawson moved first, stepping carefully toward the window, his silhouette barely visible in the faint glow of the streetlights outside. I stayed frozen, listening, my ears straining for any sound, footsteps, a voice, anything that would tell us if we were still alone. Then the front door handle turned. Emily let out a sharp breath, backing away toward the hallway. Mr. Dawson grabbed my arm, his grip firm. "We have to move, now." He steered me toward the back door, but before we could take another step, a loud knock echoed through the house. Slow, deliberate, just like before. "Don't open it," I whispered, though I wasn't sure who I was warning. None of us planned to. Then came a voice, calm, almost friendly. "We know you're in there, Emily." She stiffened beside me, and for the first time, I saw something in her eyes I hadn't seen before. Not just fear, recognition. She knew who was out there. Mr. Dawson's jaw tightened. "They're not getting in," he muttered. A second later, the knock came again, harder this time. "We don't need to make this difficult," the voice continued. "You know how this ends." Emily grabbed my wrist. "There's a way out," she whispered, "but you have to trust me." I didn't have time to question her. She pulled me toward the hallway, then through a door I hadn't noticed before, a small storage room. At first, I thought she had lost her mind. There was nowhere to go. Then she crouched down, reaching beneath a stack of old boxes, and yanked up a loose floorboard. A hidden crawl space. Mr. Dawson stayed by the door, listening. "Go," he said. "I'll buy you time." "No," Emily hissed. "They'll..." Go, he repeated. This time, his voice left no room for argument. With one last look, Emily pulled me into the crawl space, lowering the board back into place just as the front door burst open. Heavy boots pounded into the house. Voices filled the air. And then, silence. We waited, barely breathing. Then we heard it. A single gunshot. Emily's grip tightened around my hand, her whole body trembling. I wanted to move, to do something, but all we could do was wait in the suffocating dark, knowing that whatever happened next, nothing would ever be the same again. The silence after the gunshot was unbearable. Emily's grip on my hand was so tight it hurt, but I didn't pull away. We stayed frozen in the crawl space, barely breathing, listening for any sound, footsteps, voices, anything that would tell us what had happened. But there was nothing, just an eerie stillness that made my skin crawl. Minutes passed, or maybe it was longer. Time didn't feel real anymore. My mind was racing, trying to piece everything together. Who were these people? What did Emily hear that was so dangerous? And what had happened to Mr. Dawson? Then muffled voices returned. A door creaked, more footsteps, someone moving things around. They were still in the house. Emily pressed her forehead against her knees, breathing shallowly. I could feel her shaking. I wanted to tell her it would be okay, but I wasn't sure that was true. Then another voice, sharper, more commanding. We're done here. Let's go. More footsteps. The front door opened, then closed. Still, we didn't move. It wasn't until long minutes later that Emily finally lifted her head, her face pale in the faint sliver of light coming through the cracks. We have to check, she whispered. I didn't want to. Every part of me screamed to stay hidden, but I knew we couldn't. Carefully, Emily pushed the floorboard aside, crawling out first. I followed, my legs unsteady as I stood. The house was wrecked, drawers pulled open, furniture overturned, but my eyes went straight to the hallway, to Mr. Dawson. He was slumped against the wall, a hand pressed to his shoulder, blood staining his shirt. He was alive. Emily ran to him. "You're okay," she breathed, voice shaking. He gave a weak smile. "I wouldn't go that far." I helped her press a blanket against his wound while he winced, but managed to keep talking. "They won't be back. Not yet." His voice was weak, but certain. "They got what they wanted." I frowned. "What does that mean?" Mr. Dawson let out a slow breath. "They wanted a warning shot. They wanted Emily to know she can run, but she'll never be safe." Emily's face tightened, and I realized something. She wasn't scared anymore. She was angry. "We have to go," she said. "This isn't over." I looked at her, then at Mr. Dawson, then at the wreckage of the house around us. I had no idea what came next, but I knew one thing for sure. My life would never be the same again.